Chapter 11. Take a Layer. When constructing a gingerbread house, most proficient bakery artisans like our cakes suggest the following piece. Remember that how you decorate the exterior of the house is as important as how you build the interior. It seems like an extraordinary say. It seems to contradict all we have learned about our lives, valuing what is more within and superficial things on top. That, however, makes the assumption that the decorations upon a gingerbread house are merely paltry additions, and assumes that they do not truly matter. That is incorrect. The decorations upon a house tell us about what it is, how much care is put into it. Like a relationship, it must be adorned and allowed to grow, or else simply sit empty and flake away under the sun. It would have been nice to say that this thought was on Cupcake's mind as he worked to prepare the surface of the gingerbread house for decoration, as she and Carrot got ready to adorn it with treats and sweets. Instead, all that was really on her mind was the single daub of frosting that sat upon his nose, and how very much she would like to leap across the table and lick it off of him with long, slow movements. Still, something inside told her to resist. So, as they worked in the house, she simply stood there with the tube in her mouth, smiling a wicked smile, and pondering how she was eventually going to get it off of him. She would have to, because she knew he would not remove it himself. He would not remove it because she had laid it there as a sign of her affection. He was content to let it sit there until the waters of the well washed it off him, if need be. The blindfold was probably unnecessary for a taste test, but as she wrapped it around his eyes and gave it a small tug with her teeth, he certainly did not mind. Under his tutelage, Cupcake was becoming more and more proficient as a baker. As their second sprang together went on, it quickly became an amazing time for them both to firmly settle into the roles of my other. As they had worked together, she had grown and learned, watching her take on these new responsibilities. Witnessing her work toward being a bigger part of the bakery made Carrot very happy. She had been a good baker to begin with, but as he taught her everything he knew, she had only grown. Though it was clear that he would have to be a primary baker, knowing that she was there to aid him to give him strength. Around him, his bakery had come alive, filled with the touch of a mare who no longer felt the need to hide. Soon it was vibrant, welling with color. The name was still pretty bad, though. He grimaced as he thought about that. He would need a new name soon, but the thought disappeared as her hoof dropped from his, and the scent of many wonderful things caught in his nose. He lifted his hoof and immediately winced as it banged against the countertop. "Sorry," she said, running her foreleg where he bumped it. "Here, let me get them for you." He sensed her near and knew that he had grabbed up one of the treats he had made. She was now nearby, holding it to him in her mouth. He laid a bite. "Apple strudel," he said, instantly able to guess what she had made. Her little laugh showed that she had been correct. Her hoof was to his again, and she led him to the next tray. With that, he took a bite of her next creation, quickly guessing as he looked on. "Ah, an eclair!" Her giggles and the touch of her cheek being his reward. So down to Carrot Top they moved, Cupcake becoming confident as they went, Carrot more proud and happy for her. A dozen treats and pastries of all varieties had been laid there. Her growing talents had made each easily identifiable. It was reached. "Well," she said with a little sigh, "that's the end of that." Inside an instant, she felt the familiar touch of his lips to hers. It was welcomed, but not expected, and as he raised his head, the blindfold still covered his eyes. He prepared to be pondering. Sugar plum," he said before lowering his head again. He touched his lips to hers once more, held them there as her taste flowed to him. "Aha, ginger snap," he said without raising his head from her, moving down her neck and then applying a kiss along as he slowly lifted his head. He leaned into it, tickled as he realized the purpose of his gain. Once more he met her lips, let them remain there for a long moment, then once more moved down her neck, let a trail of kisses remain behind. "Honey bun," he whispered to her ear, as he moved to her other side, as she felt the soft, wet, warm part of his lips across her cheek, neck, and chest. As happy sounds began to lift from the kitchen, an older stallion that crumpled stood by the register of the bakery showroom. He realized his entrance had gone unnoticed. Feeling a little agitated that he had been left standing there, he went to where the sounds emanated to seek the shopkeepers. Upon witnessing the pleasant scene that was developing within the kitchen, he quickly turned around, once more thankfully unnoticed, and made for the register. There he left what he assumed was the proper price for his pie, and a touch more, just to be safe. The blessing stallion and walked away as quietly as he could, as the sounds that lifted from the kitchen became more immodest in nature. As he left with his pie, he did the two young ponies a favor, turning the sign to the door to close. The old pony stared at the sign above the door, the one that read Carrot Cake's Bakery Company, LLC Incorporated. Having met the pair long before, and in scenes less comforting, he wondered when the lagging stallion was going to add her to the sign. Always seemed proud of her, he thought, as he went out into the street, with how well the two fit together like that. Although Carrot's thoughts were elsewhere at the moment, it would have made the old pony happy to know that Carrot had been thinking along very similar lines. Thin, fat, and angry. Quarry preferred the names that he had given the three colts, and inside his thoughts he addressed them as such. A month and those many weeks had passed since the last time these three sat before him. Much has changed in the world of the old stallion since they had visited the office, since they made the proposal. In that time, Quarry had been able to ponder a great many things. As long as what he believed about the way the world worked had called into question. "So," he had said while looking at him over, each seeing that the finest of edges had come off his sharp stare, "most all of them have chose to take you up on your offer. They're all yours, apart from this one. Carrot Cake's Bakery Company, LLC Incorporated." The three colts looked the name over, and then peered at one another with some small surprise. They could not imagine the circumstances that would make any pony want to stay with Quarry, but, well, there was in black and white. Offered reviews with thanks. It simply added to the awkwardness that hung in the room. The presence of a fifth pony making things in the small room seemed thick with breath and moisture. "Well," laughed the thin colt as he tried to force some conversation into the room, "can't say I think much of that business sense of that one, eh?" "Nothing wrong with him," breathed Quarry out of the room as his voice rumbled around the walls. Silence hung there for a moment. The colts all looked down at one another, wondered who would be the one to mention the obvious. The angry colt volunteered quickly. "If that's the case," said the angry one with visible malice, "then you owe us a refund and a loan." "Worth 67 bits, rolled the voice of Quarry. "My secretary will write you the check." "Well, we'll just be sure that's the correct amount first," said the angry one, eyeing him. "It's the right amount," answered Quarry. "We had a deal." "Well, you like to be accurate," answered the angry colt. His smile grew as he got this one chance to level his eyes upon him, to have some small satisfaction of knowing he had gotten something out of him. His smile faded quickly as Quarry stood and glared back down over the colt, who suddenly glanced, his partners going ashen as the massive stallion began to swear. Quarry reached for the pile of papers atop the nearby cabinet, tossed them before the angry colt. "You calling me a liar, colt? It's all right there on the book and page, damn your coat. You want to know what a lie is, colt? Let me tell you about your father and..." He began to spin Quarry as his eyes started to go red. At once, the touch of a soft hoof drew him down, making him stutter to a stop. "Dear," said Wishy Will, with herself in her wheelchair. Around the small room, the 5 ponies seeking the late spring day, Quarry ran his hoof across his eyes and slowly regained composure. A lot had changed in the world of Quarry these few weeks, and now he felt as though maybe, just maybe, he could escape the wrath. Maybe find a way to live that didn't end with him having a stroke or a heart attack. He looked up back to the colts, gazed down over the 3 figures that each looking to him. He gently pushed the paper towards the angry colt. "It's all there on the page," he said while he sat down, taking Wishing Will's well into his own. "It's the same rates, same index as we talked about more than a month ago. We had a deal, but if you don't trust me, well, take it." Here Colt's jaw moved side to side. Quarry remembered himself making the same movements when Carrot stood before him. the question of trust growing within him. For the briefest of moments, Corey wondered if this cult was on the same path he had been. He had grown up not trusting. He had grown up being fearful. That fear dissipated as the cult looked back up to him and raised his hoof. "No, sir, we trust you," spoke the cult. "That number sounds about right." "Sounds right." Corey stood and leaned across the table. He shook the hoof at the angry cult and saw a look of sublime relief go across the three. Inside minutes, he was showing them to the door. The cult saying their goodbyes to wish you well as they raised themselves up from the crowded little office. As he turned to leave, the angry cult felt Corey's hoof upon his shoulder. The cult startled, jumped, and turned with the expectation of seeing a wrathful face of Corey glaring down at him. Instead, he found the older stallion looking to the floor. As Corey lifted his head, he looked to the angry cult with something approaching supplication. Would you tell your father hello for me?" asked Corey, as he looked to the cult. "And I mean that. Cordially, you know." The angry cult made and promised in quiet tones that he would. As he left the office, Corey closed the door behind him, leaving the angry cult to join his partners. As the angry cult listened, his partner spoke with the secretary. "Oh, yes," she answered. "He is happier these days. Today especially. He brought wishing well with him in order to receive an inquiry." The thin one and fat one did their best to pry, but the third cult, the one who formerly seemed angry, he simply looked around the room. The light came in through the large window, and the golf fist swam with happy flicks through the bowl. "He wants me to greet Dad for him?" he whispered to himself, feeling decades of pent-up anger drifting out of him. "Well, don't tell anyone I told you so," said Paperclip, handing them the check and looking back towards the door. "But the nicest young stallion asked them both to come here this morning. He brought me a treat, as he always does, and then asked me to wish him luck." Secret a mischievous grin. "He asked them if they would be all right with him asking their youngest daughter to marry him." "It's a touch old-fashioned, but isn't it just so romantic?" Carrot Cake stood before the door to the old familiar mansion with saddlebags shifting around him. As it came open, the figure of the butler, serving tray, appeared and blinked in the morning light. As his eyes adjusted, a smile grew on his face as he recognized the caller. "Young Mr. Cake, sir. Good to see you again," said the butler as he raised his hoof and grinned. Carrot smiled. Part of him still at odds with the funny sensation of called Mr. along brought with it. "It's very nice to see you too, Trey. Would Miss Script be available by any chance?" he asked. "Certainly, sir," intoned serving tray. "If you would like to follow me, I shall announce you." Together, they went through a large hallway and public route to a small study. Carrot flipped around the fact that he was being called sir a few times, as proper pony stared down over him from dark panes along the wall. As he approached the study, serving tray began to announce to him. Before he had a chance, the figure of Ivory was already there at the door. Serving tray went off, slightly disappointed being kept from one of the small duties he enjoyed. As Ivory gave Carrot a small but welcoming hug, the two turned back to the study. "And what brings you around to my little one, Carrot?" she asked, clearing a space on an overstuffed chair for him. "If you're not too busy, I'm not interrupting, am I?" said Carrot as he looked at the small mountain of papers and the wastepacket full of adult quills. "I most certainly am busy," she said with a giggle, "and I'm very happy you interrupted. What can I do for you?" Carrot replied to her with a smile with one of his own. Lowering his saddlebags to the floor, he pulled out some sheets of paper, some crumpled papers, and some wads of paper that went to the floor and bounced around. "I have this writing project, one that's not going well, Ivory, and I was hoping you might help?" he asked as he watched her reach for some of his abortive attempts. When she saw what he was attempting to write, she leapt up, ran her eyes across more of the pages. Carrot never heard Ivory make noises like that before. As she jumped to him, he caught her up in another hug, this one frenzied filled with squeals of joy. Almost as though she were embarrassed, she asked to excuse herself, leaving Carrot alone in the room. As he went, she literally skipped like a filly in the schoolyard. That's a yes, right?" he asked the room general. Ux. Okay, good, he answered himself, smiling as he did so. Stirring Tray had turned back down the hallway, presuming that enough time had elapsed to ask if there were anything upon he would have brought to them. Upon seeing his young mistress standing against the wall with her hose to her face, he immediately trotted forward in alarm. Miss Ivory, are you well? He asked with his concern near the surface. Ivory lowered her hose and looked up to him with a massive smile. At the same time, great wet tears rolled down her face. They had done it. They had done it, all three of them. Cupcake was safe, the plan had worked, and now the cementing of that work was playing out before her. Her best friend would be so happy, and she'd be happy for both of them, because he was already so happy. Yes, as he said, I'm quite all right. Everything is wonderful, so very wonderful. Could you bring us some ice water, Trey, and perhaps something bubbly as well? Do I look all right? Is my mane okay? Asked Cheesecake as he hovered beneath the lamppost. Carrot had been thinking about the lamppost. For so long, that had been the border of his world. How reaching this lamppost might as well have been attaining the edge of the unknown world. Today he was bringing his mother to meet two ponies who inhabited a house that had once only beheld from here, from this distant outpost of his knowledge. Today, if all went well, he would open a new chapter in the journal of his journey with the mare who now stood with him. Cupcake moved closer to answer the questions that his mother floated out over them in her ephemeral tones. You look wonderful, Cheesecake, answered Cupcake as he ran her hoof the foreleg of the older mare. I'm sure Mama and Daddy and yourself would get along wonderfully. I know it. Oh, I hope so, said the thin older mare. I don't want to embarrass either of you. Please tell me if I'm doing something wrong. Together, the three went up the sidewalk and out to the gate. As they approached the house, Carrot could see the figure of Quarry, as massive and imposing as ever. He stood behind Wishing Well, as the mare sat in her wheelchair, the two making a proper portrait of how proper ponies should arrange themselves to meet somebody new. Carrot heard his mother make a noise, and once he stopped, he turned to her. Her ears were back, her hoof once more raised its own surprise. No, she whispered under her breath, her head giving a small shake. It can't be. Mom, what? He began, reacting to her expressions as they grew on her. His head flew up to the ports, and saw Quarry staring on him perplexed, and saw Wishing Well. Cupcake's mother stood. Cheesecake, flooded the voice of the frail mare, waiting out over the lawn in the garden. Wishing Well, replied his mother as her ears came fully up. Oh, Celestia! Cheesecake! Cheesecake! Called out Wishing Well in the loudest voice that Carrot had ever heard her use. The loudest that Cupcake had ever heard her mother use in years. You know, for once, a girl's being glad to be called Cheesecake. Boo! 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 Get off the stage! You are simply deplorable! I can't help it. This moment's too heartwarming. I need to get its laugh somewhere. As Carrot and Cupcake watched, their mouths hanging open in surprise, Cheesecake took off at a trot. Soon she was galloping, her hose sounding out in loud thwacks upon the stairs. Quarry joined the two, looking on aghast as Cheesecake and Wishing Well embraced each other. The two crying aloud in happiness as big wet tears ran down their faces, and their heads were laid upon the withers of the other. It's been forever. Oh, Cheesy, how I've missed you, called Wishing Well, her voice already starting to strain under her wet efforts. Wishy-washy, wishy-washy, 25 years or more, oh, Celestia, wishy-washy, replied Cheesecake as he rocked the fragile mare more gently. More than 20 years ago, loud words had sounded out in a dance studio, the doubles of the apartment that these two mares had shared. Whatever the context of that conversation, whatever had separated them, that flew away as the two stood there in the sunlight of full spring, as the delicate mare hovered above her wheelchair, her tear and withdrawn mare who cradled her. With that, an old friendship was reborn, as the sounds of a spring morning sat across the porch. Inside the house, the sorts had been set out. As Carrot grazed over his selection, his eyes kept going to the door. He listened as the conversation in the great vast living room of the house Corey had built drew on and on. Soon the familiar sounds of "girl" began to lift from within. Soon Corey joined him, the stallion retreating as a refugee from the presence and persistence of such a conversation. Carrot wished that he'd become more comfortable around Corey. Then he could say he was now within the confidence of the stallion. He could not. There still seemed one that was not allowed to cross, but not without being measured against. Carrot sighed and looked at the fixings for a dandelion sandwich, wondering if he wanted mustard. As he did, he made room for Corey, the big stallion giving a sigh, apparently distraught at the non-presence of the last few slices of cheese he had wanted.
You eat the last slice of cheese on my cake?
Asked the stallion with a toss of his head. No, sir, said Carrot as he forced a chuckle. I'm pretty sure it was a little cold out there.
Meh,
answered Corey, slowly moving away.
I can cut up some more.
Carrot gave another sigh. He knew that there was always going to be a distance between them. Corey still called him Cake, but then again, he couldn't bring himself to call Corey anything but Sir. There was something that was not clicking between them. Then again, Corey had lashed him with a whip. That's usually a stumbling block to any sort of relationship. Wishing Well liked him well enough. She patted his foreleg and called him such a nice colt. That was more than he could have asked for. His eyes went to the door once more.
You expecting some pony cake?
Asked Corey as he stared down from the icebox. A large block of cheese in his hoof. Yes, sir! Answered Carrot, looking back to the door. A knock pathetically sounded out from the entryway. Corey looked down to Carrot, then to the door. With a few large, powerful steps, he crossed out of the kitchen towards the entryway. He looked up to Carrot, and then turned his head. He opened the door. Corey blinked in the sun. It was a familiar face of Ivory.
Oh, hello there, Miss Ivory. Come on in,
said that stallion. He looked at Carrot. Carrot saw the confused opinion on his face, while his Corey's expression fly around as he greeted his best friend's daughter. Soon, Ivory turned to him with a sly look upon her face. Carrot, she said, giving him a quick embrace. Tell me, how did the recipe come out? It mixed together quite well, he answered, watching the smile across her face. It mixed. Ivory gave him another quick hug, sliding something among his hose where his sandwich stood. Then there was off to the living room, her own salad bag hanging upon her as hose sounded out across the wooden floor. Carrie and Corey waited until the sounds of introductions had begun to die down, before turning towards the living room.
Cake?
Came the rumbling voice. Carrot looked up to see Corey standing, looking to him. Saw something of an understanding growing. The elder stallion. It had been a code. He knew. Carrot stood back and to Corey's surprise, Carrot tried to give him a hug.
Oh, well,
said Corey with a sound of exasperation, collecting the smaller stallion for a quick embrace as the knowledge of what was about to happen grew upon him. Okay, I never watched Scrubs before this, so I didn't know about the song that played at the finale. And yes, I said finale, season 9 don't count. Called The Book of Love. And one of my favorite moments from that montage is Dr. Cox literally giving JD a hug. That's what I'm thinking of right now. And The Book of Love is totally what's playing in my head. On the top of his head, Corey nodded and ushered the younger stallion into the living room. To Carrot's happiness, Cupcake King stepped beside him as soon as he entered. He laid some of the things he had grabbed from the buffet before her. 4 other mares, Cheesecake, Ivory, Ruby Quartz, and Wishing Well, watched Cupcake's nieces and nephews practice lines from a school play. Carrot's eyes lifted to Ivory, got hers in an inside glance. A slight nod was his reply. He tried to act casual, stepping at the cup awkwardly as it lay to the floor. Oh, Cuppy, spoke Ivory, I received a letter for you. It seems it came to me by accident. I brought it to me. Huh, replied Cupcake as he watched their nieces and nephews take a seat and pass it that. Silence over the room. May I have it, Ive? She asked. Of course, replied Ivory, stopping to take a sip of her tea. I've hidden it somewhere in this room. What? Asked Cupcake, as he stood and tried to where Ivory sat patiently. Oh, come on now, Ive. Why'd you go and do something like that? She asked, her tone slightly hurt. Don't be like that, Cuppy. Come on now, try to find it. Let's play hot or cold. Giggled Ivory as he stared up at an annoyed Cupcake, the mare pounding one hoof into the floor. She began to crisscross the room, listening to Ivory for hints. No, cold. Even colder, Cuppy. Ah, that way is warmer. Now why would you come back that way? You're cold again, spoke Ivory, while Cupcake's nephews and nieces cheered her on. Soon the room was evenly divided between those trying to help her, those laughing at the spectacle. Oh, Ivory, you're too cruel, she said, as she stood before the fiery place, her host dancing in frustration. You can't be that way, thing. You can keep the letter. She went back to her pillow in a huff. Cupcake laid down next to Carrot and leaned to him. He laid his head upon her, taking up some of her frustration. He tried to keep giggling as the game came to an end. Hot! What? Asked Cupcake as he raised her head to Ivory. Hot, Cuppy, you're hot. You're almost upon it, answered Ivory with a wide smile. Cupcake looked at Carrot, a look of bewilderment hanging over her. She stood and pressed her nose to his. The act elicited a few giggles from her nieces. Very hot, answered Ivory from the far side of the room, the other adults growing quiet. Cupcake nuzzled Carrot's foreleg. Before Ivory could even answer, she moved to his hoof. On fire, Cuppy, answered Ivory, voice going softer. I'm so happy you found it. So very happy, Cuppy. Carrot looked at his hoof and removed the charger from his plate, revealing where Ivory had hidden the letter when they had spoken the passwords in the kitchen. Cupcake looked down at the letter upon the silver plate, saw the exquisite envelope. She moved to lift it, but Carrot moved first. Carefully and tenderly he opened it, breaking the wax seal so much that it remained as possible. With that, he lifted it with his teeth, mostly for her to take the envelope, much like they had done once upon a mattress in a bakery in the city beyond. Cupcake stood with the envelope in her mouth, and soon what was transpiring began to register with her. Once, Carrot had laid the letter before him. With that, he asked for her hoof, a string of causality wrapped around him and bound them to one another. As she did, other ponies in the room looked on in wonder, up and looked into the rose-colored eyes that he had first fallen into a year ago. Even now, they grew moist, her understanding of what he was doing drawing on her. Even as they began to hide behind the cheeks that were rising in a broad smile, those eyes still called to him, as they would for decades if she would let him. Dear Miss Cupcake, began Carrot, from Carrot Cake. Carrot cleared his voice, and lifted his hoof to hers that much more. A proposal for marriage. The envelope dropped from Cupcake's mouth. I have never been happier than during the last year, than during the time you have been in my life. He felt her short, sharp breast began, felt her anticipation growing, through the small connection that ran through her hose. You have added so much joy to my life, supported me, given me strength. Without breaking the connection between them, without taking her hoof out of his, she ran her face over her foreleg, wiped away the tears that were forming. Have given me reason to believe in myself, because you believe in me. She stopped trying to hide the tears, just looked down at him as she read the letter. Cupcake's cheeks were hurting, her smile so strong it consumed her. Even as she cried, she still set her eyes upon him, this gangly colt, this stallion in his underbite, this wonderful stallion that made her so happy. I will work to make you happy, do all I can to show you how much I love you every day. Never stop trying to show you how much I mean to me. Yes, she said, her voice just above a whisper. Carrot jumped a little. He was not done yet. He had not even reached the question. In all things, our pain or fear, our hope, you'll be able to find shelter in me. I'll do everything I can to keep you safe in. Yes, she said again, her voice louder and more certain. He laughed a little. You not even reached the question. Was she allowed to say that before he even asked it? Dude, take the hint! He pressed on and looked up to her. Eyes. In all things, you'll be my partner, my equal. And never will I doubt or demean you. I love you, Cupcake. And I ask you, please, will you? Yes! Yes, get it! She cried as she leapt into him, bowling him over and upon the pillows where he had been seated. Her lips were once upon his. As the applause of a half-dozen hoes across the floor reached them, there is where they stayed. Slowly, she lifted her head as her nieces giggled, and her nephew continued to voice the opinion of all little boys, namely that what was transpiring was gross, and that he would not put up with it much longer. As rose-colored eyes stared down at him, he could not help but hope that the little colt would someday have ample reason to change his opinion. Marry me? Carrot concluded while he laid his hoof beside her face. Yes, she whispered once more, touching her hoof to his. As the last happy tear fell from her face, she lowered herself again, laying her lips to his once more. Despite protests and giggles of the onlookers, that was the way they stayed for a great long while. At least, until the more romantically inclined population of the room demanded that they congratulate the two lovers. I've said this before. I've never really cared about view counts. All I've ever done has been just to have fun, give out my stories, and do things like that. But still, it amazes me when I look at the view counts to see how much popular certain stories have gotten. For instance, Longing, a simple story about Twilight and Spike, is undoubtedly one of the most popular ones on my channel. And instead of the Luniverse, a story about Twilight and Sunset becoming element bearers is also a really popular one. And yet another odd thing I've always seen, besides that somehow my riffs are always the ones that get the highest views. Never know why. I guess people just like seeing me angry. But the weird ones that I've noticed is there'll be like 60 views for part 2. Part 3 will have 48. And then it'll be back down to 16 for part 4. Like, do people just not look at the numbers? Do they just decide, I only want to watch every even number of chapters? He always seems to be his best at the even ones. The odd ones, I'm not completely satisfied, but hey, when he goes even, you watch out, bro. Guess this is one of those weird things you talk about when you've done this for so long.